رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I do apologize. I think there was maybe the announcement didn't happen as we had planned. I just want to give a very short presentation on Zakat, and inshallah I'm very happy to take any questions anyone will have about this topic. About myself, my name is Sohail Hanif. I'm the Chief Executive of National Zakat Foundation. It's the only charity that collects and distributes Zakat nationwide in the United Kingdom. I've been in this position for the last 6 months. Prior to that, I've been a lecturer. I've been a lecturer and researcher in Islamic law. And I've been a part of this community since I was young. I was coming to this mosque since I was 8 years old. So this is very much my home setting. What I want to share with you all are just a very few brief points about Zakat. First of all, I just want to say 3 things about why Zakat is so important. One of them is just from the meaning of the word. Zakat means purification and growth. And the reason why it means purification is that when a period of time passes over our wealth, it no longer belongs fully to us. A part of it now belongs to the poor. If we do not give it to them, then we are eating money which is not ours. And that act is an act of, if you like, impurification, or an act of introducing filth or introducing the lack of blessings into our lives. The Sahaba or the Tabi'een, they said, أَطِبْ طَعَامَكْ يُسْتَجَبْ دُعَاءُكْ. If you keep your food clean and pure, your du'as are going to be answered. And so every instruction to make sure our food is halal, our lives are halal, or in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, إِنَّ اللَّهَ طَيِّبٌ لَا يَقْبُلُ إِلَّا طَيِّبًا. Allah is pure and good. He only accepts what is pure and good. And so to give the zakat is to maintain the purity and the blessings of ourselves, really. And that's why the importance of zakat starts with us before we even talk about other people. Zakat in Arabic also means growth, and this is because of the promise that Allah and His Messenger, the Prophet said, مَا نَقَصَ مَالٌ مِّن صَدَقَةٍ. If you spend for the sake of Allah, your money will never decrease, because Allah is the one who accepts it. And Allah has promised to increase the people who spend for His sake. So point number 1 is that zakat, we need it for ourselves before we even talk about other people. Point number 2 is that from the beginning of Islam and the beginning of the Quran's message to society, the Quran challenged its society in 2 very clear and distinct ways. One was the challenge of Tawheed. Everyone was told there's only one God and you have to know and worship Him. Very simple. The second was the challenge for its society that you have to care for the downtrodden. The Quran speaks a lot right from the beginning of the revelation about the yatim and the miskeen and the ibn sabil. A lot. The orphan, the impoverished, and the refugee. Very clear verses that if you don't care for these people, then you're going to be in trouble with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You might even find yourself in hell. For example, Surah Al-Haqqa of the Meccan Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, about people in hell. خُذُوهُ فَغُلُّوهُ. Take him and tie him. ثُمَّ الْجَحِيمَ صَلُّوهُ. And then in the hell roast him. ثُمَّ فِي سِلْسِلَةٍ ذَرُعُهَا سَبْعُونَ ذِرَاعًا فَاسْلُكُوهُ. And then in this chain of 70 cubits long also make him tied. Why? Only 2 crimes this man had that took him to hell. إِنَّهُ كَانَ لَا يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ الْعَظِيمِ وَلَا يُحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. He didn't believe in God the Tremendous and didn't used to urge people to feed the poor. That's the 2 things that take you to hell. Urging people to feed the poor. Right from the beginning of Islam, one of the most central meanings of Islam is this idea. That's why before there even was a thing called zakat, the Meccan surahs already described about the mu'mineen, الَّذِينَ فِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ مَعْلُومٌ لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ. That the believers were those people who, in their wealth, was always a fixed portion to help the needy. Those who ask and those who don't even get to ask. So even before the zakat came, it was understood. Being a mu'min means some of your wealth is set aside for the people in need. This is the second thing what I want to share, is that care for the needy is of the most intrinsic meanings of Islam from the beginning of the revelation. The third thing I want to say about zakat, and the last thing, is that when the Prophet ﷺ went to Medina, he laid the foundations of what we can call Islamic civilization. And he told us that this civilization is built on 5 principles. We call these the 5 pillars of Islam. These 5 pillars, we often learn about them as children, and we often think of them as something simply private between ourselves and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but actually, these are the 5 principles of the entire civilization of Islam. These are social pillars. These are the pillars which are the basis of how we come together as a community. If you look at Salat, for example, Salat is something we don't just pray by ourselves, we pray it in Jama'ah. Salat is something for the sake of which we build masajid. The mosque was the first institution the Prophet built ﷺ in Medina at the beginning of this new order, the order of the age of Islam. What does the mosque signify? The mosque is a place of land that belongs to nobody. If anyone says, this is my living room but also pray in it, this is not a mosque. A mosque is only a mosque when no one owns it and it's dedicated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means that every believer is equal in it. What the mosque creates is an understanding of ummah. That what brings us all together is not color or race or language or profession or class or dress. What brings us together is simply one thing, that we belong to Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The mosque creates ummah. The mosque creates community. That's why all of the great institutions of Islam actually came from the masjid. The university started in the masjid. The courts of justice started in the masjid. All the great bazaars of Islam, the great souk of Damascus or any great city, was next to the Jami', the great mosque of every great city. Even in modern Britain, the well-established mosques are always where you have all the Muslim businesses and restaurants and charities and media outlets. The idea is the mosque is an anchor for the ummah. The mosque is the beginning of an understanding that we are a collective together. Ramadan is the time when we eat together more than any other time. We meet in the masajid together more than any other time. Ramadan is a communal activity, it's not just private. Hajj is the meeting of the worldwide ummah, when you understand we are a global collective and we're one. Zakat fits into this system. Zakat is not just charity in general now. Zakat is the duty that creates ummah between us. And there's 2 rules of zakat which illustrate this, which all the schools of law have agreed to. One is the fact that zakat is paid Muslim to Muslim. So zakat is not simply charity now, which Islam has spoken about from the beginning. Zakat is the sacred tie of brotherhood. That if you're a Muslim and I'm a Muslim, I have a duty to care for you because we are a family. That's the message of zakat. Whoever says La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah has entered a family. And just like within your blood family, there's a duty of care, otherwise you're considered criminal if your brother is hungry and you're not taking care of them. Similarly, what zakat is telling us is that this ummah of belief is a family. And you are like criminal if you let your brother in faith be hungry and you have sufficient means. This is the essence of what the zakat teaches us. The other rule of zakat, which all the schools of classical law agree upon, is the fact that zakat is meant to be paid in the area where you live. All of the schools of law agree to this. They've only debated whether this is a fard or a sunnah. And so even the word sunnah is a strong word though. Sunnah means the proper way of the early community, the proper method of this institution is paid where you live. Why is that the case? It's for this reason, so that all of us will have a concern about what are the needs of the people where we live. Do we have neighbors who are suffering in silence? We have a duty to make sure that they know if there's an ummah near them that they will be cared for. What is zakat teaching us then within these 5 pillars is that if the masjid brings us together shoulder to shoulder as an ummah, the zakat says now you have a duty of care to each other. And so when you look at these 5 pillars together, what they are the foundations of is what you understand from the words of the Prophet ﷺ, Yadullahi ma'al jama'a, wa inna shaytana la ma'al wahid, wa huwa min al-ithnaini ab'ad. The hand of Allah is with the group. When a person is by themselves, the devil is with this person. When 2 people are together, the devil is further away. All of the Sharia, all of its institutions are about how can the believers come together in a collective. Because when we are together, we strengthen each other, we remind each other, we support each other, we catch each other, and that's the preservation of Iman in our personal lives, and that's the preservation of Iman for the people who will come after us. What do you want your children to do? To learn about Allah as outcasts, or to learn about Allah in the safety and protection of a community? That's our duty, and that's the da'wah of Islam. These 5 principles are the principles of this da'wah. So all I want to say 3 things about zakat. A is we need it for our own blessings and purification. 2 is that care for the needy is of the most central meanings of Islam from the beginning of the revelation. 3 is that zakat is an institution. If we see to it properly, it's about how we come together and make being a Muslim meaningful. So every Muslim in this country should be able to hold their head up high and say, I'm proud to be a Muslim because I belong to a group that looks after me. And this is of the essence of the da'wah of what will preserve Islam in these lands and make it easy for the next generation to believe in Allah and His Messenger in the safety of community. 3 things. Down to the institution itself, what is zakat? I've got about 5 questions I want to address here. The first is, what kind of wealth is zakat on? Zakat is not on all of your wealth, and it's not simply an income tax. Zakat is paid on what the ulama call growing wealth in Arabic, al-mal an-nami. What they mean by growing wealth is that it's the form of wealth which is moving. It's the form of wealth we're always trying to increase. Why is it on this kind of wealth? Because zakat should feel like a haircut. You cut some hair, you don't miss it because there's more coming. Zakat is on those kinds of wealth that we're always trying to grow. If you take something out, you won't miss it because more is coming. That's why there's zakat on camels and cows and sheep, which obviously doesn't concern most of us here, or all of us probably. Because in these economies, people are just trying to have more babies in their sheep. So if you have 40 new sheep this year are born, if you take one from the poor, you won't miss it because there's more coming. This is the idea of what zakat is on. There's zakat on agriculture. So if something new comes from the ground, take a little bit for the poor, the rest is yours. You won't miss it because this is all new wealth, and new will come next season. In our economy, which is what we call trade and services economy, the zakat is on basically money. All we're trying to do in our work is to increase money. And so zakat is on 4 things which act like money, only 4 things. So the zakat we have to pay with, because we don't do the sheep and the cows and the camels and the farming, I'm sure most of us, or not all of us. The zakat we have to worry about is on the 4 things which have the meaning of money in them, which is money, whatever money you have, gold and silver, because gold and silver have the meaning of money. Traditionally and historically they've been able to act as money. Very recently the currencies were backed by gold, so this is counted as money in the sacred law. And the last thing is what we call trade stock. By trade stock I mean things you bought to sell. Because putting money into an item, selling the item to make more money, buying more of the item and selling it to make more money, that's the basic way that we increase money through trade. So somebody who's bought an item to sell it, that item is just like money in another form for the trader. So zakat is only on 4 things: your money, your gold, your silver, and any items you bought to sell. Okay, and I'll come back to talk about these in just a little bit. There's no 5th thing which has zakat. Every modern thing like shares and pensions and cryptocurrencies, etc., they will only have zakat if we can show that they have these in them. Otherwise there's no zakat. Zakat's only on 4 things for us. This is the first thing. The second thing is you have to own a particular amount of these to have to pay zakat. What is the amount? The Prophet ﷺ set a minimum of wealth in all of these types of economy. 5 camels, 30 cows, 40 sheep, something of the land. And in our economy, which is the trade and money economy, he set 2 nisabs. One in terms of gold, one in terms of silver. Because these were the currencies of trade. 200 dinars, 20 dinars, 200 dirhams. Dinar was the gold coin, dirham was the silver coin. In his time, ﷺ, these were of similar value. Over time, they became of different value. And so that's why you might find 2 values on the internet for what is the minimum amount of wealth you have to pay zakat. The difference between the 2 is actually of an order of 10. So the silver nisab today is about 400 pounds. The gold nisab today is about 4,000 pounds. Difference of an order of 10. Which of the 2 are we meant to be following? The ulama traditionally said, follow the one that's best for the poor. Traditionally it meant the lower one, but you'll find people arguing both ways. I'll stick to the lower one for now, which is the silver nisab. So you have a minimum of a nisab. I'll tell you where you can go online to get the exact numbers. When you have this minimum wealth, what you do is then you add up all of your zakatable assets, your money, your gold, your silver, your trade stock. Take away, add this up and you get a number. Take away any money you owe other people, any bills you've received already, subtract that. The final number, if it's above the nisab, then you are going to be a zakat payer. This is how much you have to own. Third question is, when do you pay zakat? Everyone is meant to pay zakat on their personal zakat date. We are all meant to have our own zakat date in our own lives. Like we have our own birth date or your own anniversary date. It's not like everyone is meant to pay at the same time. How do you know your personal date? It's tied to your economic history. So what happens is when somebody first crosses the nisab in their life, let's say somebody after university got their first job, for example. The first time you cross this nisab line, what you're meant to do is note the date. That's it, nothing more. 1 year later, 1 lunar year later on the Islamic calendar, 1 year later on the same date, you then see, am I still above the nisab? If you're still above the nisab, then you'd pay 2.5% of that full number. Your money plus your gold plus your silver plus your trade stock minus your debts. That final number, 2.5%. 1 year later, are you still above the nisab? 2.5%. 1 year later, 2.5%. This is your date for life, unless one day or 1 year, on that date you are below the nisab, in which case you don't pay zakat and you lose the date. And then you wait for the next time to cross the nisab, you note the date, 1 year later, if you're still above nisab, 2.5%, that's your new date. So the idea is we're meant to have our own date based on when we cross the nisab. And we look at that date every year, and the zakat calculation is easy. It's what are you worth on that date. You don't have to keep track of when the money came and when it went out, because money is this fluid thing. It will go and it will come. You don't have to keep track of it during the year. That would be a difficult calculation. Just on that date, what are you worth? Simple as that. Every year, we're meant to have our own date. If someone doesn't know their date, some people learn about zakat later in life. If you don't know your date, then the best thing you should do is look back in your history and try to estimate what is the date that's right for you, based on your economic history. If your story is complicated and you really can't even make a good estimate, then just pick one arbitrarily. But this is the idea. Your zakat calculation is on your date, which is meant to be coming from your history. There's no idea that the zakat is simply paid in Ramadan. It's calculated on your date. Now, some people like to pay in Ramadan for the reward and the blessings, but what you're really doing is just estimating, because you won't know what you really owe except on your date. So in Ramadan, you might make an estimate. I'll give, let's say, £500 zakat. Then on my date, I will know exactly what I owe. And if exactly what I owe is, for example, 600, then I can pay the other 100. So you can pay before your date, but you're estimating. Only on the date do you know what is the wajib, what is the actual thing which you owe. That's personal to all of us. The fourth question, does the zakat ever cancel if I don't pay it? And the answer is no, because if you owed somebody money, if you don't pay them, you still owe them money. So if we haven't paid zakat in the past, we still owe the zakat. Now, if somebody hasn't paid zakat before, then they shouldn't worry about the past right now. Just sort out the present and understand how to pay zakat. And once you've got that clear, then yes, take a bit of time and just make an estimate, what have you not paid in the past? And just make a plan that's not too much of a burden for you. You can do it in bits and pieces, whatever's easy for you. So, but the past is still a debt which is due, but don't forget the present. Just focus on the present and make sure the present is clear. Last of my 5 questions in this section is the fact that does anything you pay count as zakat? No, you have to have intended it between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this is my zakat. It's as simple as that at some point. And somebody can pay zakat for somebody else as well. It happens often in families and maybe in shared partnerships and businesses. Somebody can pay zakat for somebody else, but the person on whose behalf they're paying has to know that and approve of it, because it has to count as their intention. So in families, what often happens is the wife has to calculate her own zakat liability separately. The husband calculates his own zakat liability separately, but then the husband can pay the wife's zakat from the husband's money. This is fine, as long as the wife knows and approves, because it has to be her intention. So I've given you 5 principles. What wealth is the zakat on? Just your money, your gold, your silver, and your trade stock. How much do you have to own above a nisab? I'll show you where that number is, where you can find it online. When do you pay? On your personal zakat date, and I've shown you roughly how you figure this out. If you don't know, then you estimate or you just choose one. Does the zakat have a time out? No, it's always due. But focus on this year, get it right, and then you can make a plan for anything you haven't paid in the past. And last one, does anything count as zakat? No, you have to intend it. to count. So these are 5 things as a principle of how the zakat works. Last thing I want to say, 6 points of how you do the calculation, and then we're done. And I'll answer, inshallah, any question which you have. Point number 1 is, how do you do the calculation? Like I've already said to you, add up all of your zakatable wealth, subtract any bills or debts you have today. The final number, if it's above the nisab, you pay 2.5% of the whole number. That's how you do the calculation. Now, let's look at money. What does it mean to add up your money? It's really easy. Add up your money in all of its forms, in the bank and in your pocket and whatever the currencies are, add them all up. What about money somebody owes you? If you lend somebody money, this money you've lent somebody is still your money, so you still have to pay the zakat on it. But this money is not in your hand right now. And so what you can do is you have 2 options. The money you've lent someone. Let's say I've lent somebody money and I said pay me back in 5 years. One option is I just add that to my money and I pay zakat on it each year. So in other words, I pay zakat for that money each year. Then in the 5th year when I receive the money, I've already paid all the zakat. So I just keep it. I don't have to do anything. The other option I have, because the money is not in my hand right now, is I don't pay the zakat on it. I wait till I actually receive it. But then when I receive it, then I'll pay 5 years worth of zakat from it, because for the 5 years that I haven't paid, then I can keep the rest. I've got 2 options with money that I've lent to somebody and it's not in my hand right now, but it is actually my money. So this is about money. About gold and silver, the ulama have disagreed and debated. What about the gold and silver people actually wear? Like typically a jewelry that a woman wears. Is this like money or is this like a clothing, like a fixed asset? So the ulama of the Hanafi school said gold and silver is always like money. Whatever the form is, however you use it. Because the only reason why it was so desired as jewelry is that somebody could easily liquidate it if they're in hard times. And you can always liquidate gold on a fair market. And so for these scholars, they say you pay the zakat on all gold and silver, as long as it's at least 50% pure, so not less than 12 carats of gold. And you pay it on the value of the gold that a jeweler would give you today. We call this the scrap gold value. How much would you get for the gold today? That's what you have to evaluate it as. And the other ulama, they say that if a woman wears it, regularly or even irregularly, if it's like a worn item, then there's no zakat on it. So there's 2 opinions about the gold which is worn. That's all I'll say about the gold. The last one is the trade stock. What is the trade stock? It's things you bought to sell. Something you bought to sell, you only put money into it because it's liquid and you intend as soon as you can to liquidate it again. So these items, there is zakat on their market value. But your intention for purchasing then becomes important. Let's say, for example, somebody buys a second home. Is there zakat on the second home? It all depends on their intention. If they bought it to sell it, I bought the home, my only intention is maybe I'm going to fix it up and put it on the market. If that's my intention, then I owe zakat on the full value of the home. Because it's a home today and tomorrow it's just going to be money. That's my intention. But if I bought a home to put it on rent, then it's not on the market. The home itself, I'm not going to be selling it. And therefore there's no zakat on the value of this home. As for the rent, that's just going to join my money. And whatever money I have on my date, I'll pay zakat on. If I bought a second home, and my intention is I just don't want money lying in the bank, I'd rather put it into a property, and I'll see in the future, I'm not thinking about selling today, maybe I'll sell it in the future, I will see. This is not a trade item. And there's no zakat in this purchase either. This is the idea, so your intention does count. If somebody has multiple cars for pleasure or use, no zakat. Multiple cars for rental, no zakat. Multiple cars for resale, zakat, on the market value of those cars. So this is the idea of trade stock, things you bought only because you want to sell them. There's zakat on the market value of these items. If you bought them to sell, but you no longer are interested in selling, you want to use it now, no zakat. If you bought it for your personal use, and now you're putting it on the market, still no zakat. It's only you bought it to be liquid. You bought it because you want to get money out of it. That's the trade stock. So these are the 4 things you add. Your money, your gold, your silver, your trade stock. That's it. What about these modern instruments like pensions and shares and cryptocurrencies, etc.? On these modern things, I'll give you the advice that we give in National Zakat Foundation with the muftis that we work with. When it comes to the shares, shares represent a part ownership in a company. Some people buy shares and their intention is just to sell them. So if you bought shares as a trader, this is trade stock for you. It's just money in another form. So this you add it to the rest of the full market value because it's trade stock for you. If you bought shares not to trade, just for the long game, I'll make some dividends and I'll see what I do in the future. If you buy shares not to trade in them, then they are not trade stock. And they're not money and they're not gold and they're not silver. So there's no zakat on the share as a whole. However, this share represents part ownership of all the assets of that company. You are a part owner of the factories. You're a part owner of the offices. You're a part owner of their laptops. You are also a part owner of their money. You are also a part owner of their trade stock. And so you are a part owner of some zakatable assets within the share. And so what we believe is the fairest way to look at this kind of ownership is that you should give the zakat on the proportion of the zakatable assets that are in your ownership. How do you do that? If you look at the balance sheet of the company, you will see what proportion of the company's worth is zakatable assets, meaning really money, trade stock primarily. So let's pretend you did the homework and you said 10% of the full worth of the company is the money and the trade stock. Then we say 10% of your shares, give zakat on them. 2.5% of 10%. This is what we advise. If you don't want to look at the whole balance sheet, then our muftis have been through the main FTSE 100 companies, and they said generally it doesn't exceed 25%. They went through the main companies and said the zakatable proportions of these companies, shares, never exceeds 25%. So what they advise is then 2.5% of 25% of all of your shares. So I'll repeat this one last time. If you bought shares to sell them, you owe zakat on the full market value of these shares. If you bought shares not to sell them, you owe zakat on the proportion of the shares that correspond to zakatable assets. You can find this proportion in the balance sheet, or you can assume 25%. 2.5% of 25%. That's our advice on shares. Our advice on pensions is similar. Some pensions are just a salary you get after you retire, and there's no investment in your name today, there's no zakat today. Other pensions are schemes that you opt into, and they're just investment schemes. You understand where the money is, the investment is all in your name, it's just like these shares. What we advise is you owe the zakat on the proportion of zakatable assets in these investments. And if you look up online, we'll give you various benchmarks that we've used based on our research on these schemes. On the cryptocurrencies, what we advise, some cryptocurrencies are used to help payment, like Bitcoin. It's like money in another form, we say treat it as money. Some cryptocurrencies are just assets, are just tokens, like NFTs. There's no zakat on them at all, unless you bought them to sell them. So that's just some of our advice on the contemporary investments. The last thing I'll say is about where to give the zakat. I've mentioned at the beginning that the sunnah of zakat is to pay it where you live, and the reason is that it's meant to create ties of care and concern and belonging and brotherhood and support where you live. That's our duty to each other, because the neighbor in faith has a particular haqq on us. The zakat is teaching us. My advice to everybody is, if you don't pay your zakat in the UK, at least start paying some of it here. It will honor this right, the right of the neighbor, and secondly, it will start a journey for you, because many in our community assume that no one is in need here because we live in a welfare state. But the truth of the matter is, there's a lot of people struggling, and once you start following the journey, you will start learning yourself about what the difficulties Muslims face here and what are the projects that you can and should be supporting. National Zakat Foundation is the only charity for the collection and distribution of zakat nationwide. It's been operating for just over 10 years. We help people with hardship grants, so someone who just needs money for basic costs. We help them with money for this emergency needs. We believe money is the most dignified way to help someone, so they can choose for themselves how they wish to support themselves. We give them money through bank transfer if they have a bank account. A lot of people we support are refugees and asylum seekers who've come from difficult situations into the country. They typically don't have bank accounts, and we help them through the post office network. They can take their ID and their reference, and the post office can give them support. We help people with housing. If people are struggling with shelter, to pay for rent deposit, rent arrears, council tax, basic furniture. We help people who are unemployed and can't get into work to have a course of work so they can get into employment again. We help people who are skilled but don't have the tools to give them the tools so they can get back into employment again. We help people who are financially struggling but they wish to take on a course of education for public service in the community to pay for that education. We have a heat map on our website to show where the zakat is coming in and coming out throughout the United Kingdom in various throughout the country. We give people a personalized email to let them know when and where the zakat has been paid as well. And all I wish to say at the end of this is just that Muslims, we don't realize this perhaps, Muslims are the most disproportionately represented community when it comes to poverty. According to the last census, which is from 2011 really, 50% of Muslims are technically living in poverty, whereas for the wider population it's around 18%. So as a community, we are actually the most misrepresented when it comes to poverty. The Muslim census did a survey in the pandemic, and what they found was a lot of people struggled and lost work and had financially were affected. Muslims were, according to their research, about 10 times more affected than the wider population. That's in terms of, if you look at the prison population, again, the data is not very nice. Muslims make up 5% of the general population and about 15%, and some say more, of the prison population. This all returns back to economic issues and lack of support for our youth to find better ways to look out for themselves other than the drugs and everything else that disproportionately Muslim youth get dragged into. So we have a lot of issues here at home in our community. Currently we have a cost of living crisis where there's, as you will all know now, the worst inflation, rise in energy prices, rise in fuel prices the country has seen since the 50s. Muslims are going to be disproportionately affected by this. The charity that I run, National Zakat Foundation, we've seen almost doubling the number of people who are asking us for support. And we're trying to figure out how we can raise double the zakat just to see to these needs. And in the upcoming year, we're expecting it to get worse because the energy prices are going to be going up again towards the end of the year. So all I'm saying in this point is just to say that there's a genuine need in the UK. There are genuinely people looking for help. And my advice is, for the sake of what I've said today, at least give some of your zakat here. And finally, if you go to our website, nzf.org.uk, you'll find a lot of services to help you calculate. There's a very, very good online calculator, probably the best on the internet. You just click your assets and it takes you through the whole calculation in the order that I've just presented with a lot of useful help. You can book a free 15-minute consultation and someone can talk you through your own business or whatever it might be to help you get your own personal sort of situation answered. You can send an email with a question. You'll have a knowledge bank with a lot of questions already answered. So I do recommend you visit our service, nzf.org.uk. If you can't remember that, just think of National Zakat Foundation. That's all I'll say for now, and I'm at your service, and I'm from this community as well. Unfortunately, I've stopped praying Jummah in the Kingston now. I prayed Jummah in the park in New Malden because it's right next to my home. But otherwise, I'm from this community. This is my local masjid as well, and I'm happy to connect with anyone here as well, if you don't get a chance to ask any questions right now. But that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your patience. If anyone wants to ask anything, you're most welcome. So what we do currently, because we are representing the trust of the givers, we do some level of investigation. So we ask people to upload bank statements. If they have a rent, we ask them to share us a contract of their rent that they're paying. If they're on universal credit, we ask them to share us documentation of their universal credit. We ask them to give us a little summary of their story. We ask them for their ID. And so we do our part to investigate their situation. And to make sure that they are eligible for this support. Me personally, I don't think this is the sunnah of all of this. And the reason for this is that if you look at the zakat that I've told you about, that's about building this tie of care and responsibility and so on. The actual fiqh, what it says is, you need to see something that makes you feel most likely the person is in need, and then the zakat is valid, even if your judgment is wrong. This is what the fiqh says. And what the Holy Quran says is the people most worthy of our support are the people that don't ask. And in the Quran it says, the jahil thinks this person has no problem, because other than giving the smallest hint, they will never repeat again that they have any need. So the Quran tells us we have to help the people who don't actually even want to ask. And the Quran wants to maintain that dignity. So when you put all of the Sunnah and the Quran together, this idea of overly investigating, I don't think it's from the Sunnah. I think that from the Sunnah to see some sign, do some level of investigation, but don't make someone so intrusive that they have to expose to you all of their monthly expenditure and all of their, that level of intrusion. We do it though, only because we operate through the internet, we don't know who the person is, and we're a little bit impersonal, and so we feel that we have this the only way we can represent the trust. We don't have any other way to check. But going forwards, my intention is, and I've started some trialing of this, is I'd like to bring the assessment into the communities. So that, for example, the mosque can have guidelines from us, and they can make an easier assessment. You can sometimes tell through other forms of knowledge what the person's circumstances, without them sharing with you all of the 3 months of expenses and why they went to Costa, and it becomes a very difficult conversation. So yes, we as a charity, we do a lot of investigation, but I'm not saying this is necessarily the best thing, but it's the best thing for us because of how we are operating.
Basically, you delegate all the responsibility to him, and then he is happy to take this task on your behalf. So, with your charity, is more like wakala. So when you give them zakat, you are basically delegating the zakat distribution to them. Or they are acting more like a facilitator. There is no an official delegation of task basically. I mean, from the
Yeah, it's a very good question. So we actually do a wakala from the fuqara as well. So what we do with the fuqara, as they apply for the zakat, we ask them, do you authorize us to use the zakat on your behalf in the way that helps us deal with your situation? And why do we do the wakala of the fuqara? The reason is that if we're going to be paying rent on someone's behalf, so if somebody says, I've got a rent arrear, I'm going to be kicked out of my home, then we will look at the assessment. If we agree with the case, we will give the rent straight to the landlord, for example. It won't go to them and to the landlord. And how do we justify this? Is because we get the wakala from them. That the fuqara say to us, yes, use my zakat, receive it for my sake and spend it for my sake. And that's how we get the authorization from them to address directly what their problem is. Or to pay for a course for them. If someone's doing a work course, then we give directly to the work provider through the wakala from the faqir. The only time we give the money directly is what I call the hardship grant. We give the faqir directly the money and then they can choose. That's for the faqir. So we do wakala of the fuqara. As for the giver, there's no, I think it's implicitly, my understanding is it's wakala implicitly from the giver as well. Just because the giver has given me money, not as a gift to me, but because I've told them I will give it to the faqir in this way. And so I think shara'an I'm the wakil by the virtue of this trust, because it's not a hiba to me to keep it. So I think from the giver, at best of my understanding, it's automatically wakala because it said give the money this way. And from the faqir we do explicit wakala so that we can represent their interests on their behalf. Mm-hmm.
But the Sunnah says, usually they state or they
Mm-hmm.
because it's better that they collect zakat and they spend on their behalf. But in that process, there is specific formal delegation of suggested.
No, this is very, very, very good idea. Thank you very much.
I presume that the people in the trust, do
Yeah, so in order for a project like this to work, then we don't rely on volunteers. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to reach the scale. Like in February, we're receiving 3 applications every hour. If you imagine for a small charity, that's a lot of applications. In the last year, we helped 12,000 people. We distributed £5 million of zakat in these last 12 months. So it's operating at quite a good level of scale, so it can't operate like this on volunteer support. In terms of how the salaries are functioned, again, we justify it in more than one way. So from the zakat, we do take a 10% and we tell the giver, if you want, you can cover this with sadaqah. This 10%, we do not spend it on management, we don't spend it on rent or electricity or fundraising or marketing or anything like that. It's simply the cost of getting the zakat to the recipient. So it's the cost of whatever that transfer is, and it's the cost of the people who are checking who is the right recipient so that the money can go. So it's the cost of distribution, it's not the cost of any management or any offices or anything like that. And my strong suspicion is even the charities that say 100%, this is how they operate as well. Because if you're giving a food parcel to a village in Somalia, let's say, there's going to be a man who drives the truck, who packages the food, who gives them this food parcel. My strong suspicion is that they will price the food parcel in such a way to cover the cost of this man. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to make the system work. So this is just what we do spend on, and we tell people up front, if you want to give an extra 10% of sadaqah to cover this, you can, but it's only for distribution. It's not for anything else. How do we justify this? Yes, you can talk about the amilin, which some people are happy with that argument. Otherwise, the other issue is it's to do with the fact that we are the wukala of the fuqara, which I said we have this wakala from them. Because the idea is some charities, they take the money and then they will find poor people. Whereas we already have lots of poor people waiting for the help. And they've asked us to use the zakat in the way that is in their interests. And so in their wakala, as soon as we receive the zakat, it's as if the faqir has already received it. And we've made it clear to the givers and to the public that we just need to pay for that cost of distribution, otherwise we will not be able to offer this level of service where we check the applicants, we check the story, we make sure everything else. So that's just how we do it, and it can be justified through amalin, justified through wakala, and it's just the cost of the distribution itself. Barakallahu feekum.
How many people are in your charity altogether?
We're about 30. No, it's about 10. 10 are the people who do the distribution. No, these 10 are the people who do distribution. We have other people in our team who do the technology, who do the management, who do the finances. None of them have anything from the zakat. We're just facilitating the work. Then we've got about 10 people. Their only job is to read the applications, to make sure this person is faqir, and to authorize the payment. So these 10 people, they are our equivalent of the man who drives the truck to give the food. So they're the ones who are what I'm calling the distribution service. It's about 10 people. The rest, no, we pay for the rest of the salaries with gift aid, and we do sadaqah. We ask for sadaqah from the public as well. Barakallahu feekum.
And then also, I work in myself, I work in a royal. We give share, I mean, to have a bike company. I should pay them this.
So you didn't acquire.
70 quid, 80 quid.
Yeah.
Once a year. It's another big shareholder.
Sure.
Given this by gift for the company.
So you didn't acquire it to be a trader, so there's no zakat on the full value. The dividend is just part of your money. You only count the money one day of the year, so you don't have to do anything extra for the dividend. All that remains is the advice that we give, is that there'll be some proportion of raw mail which will be money. And so that proportion of the share you should give the zakat on. If you can either find out directly from them, or you can assume 25%. This is the advice that we give on this. No, so let's say the whole share today, your shareholding today, if you sold all of it, you would make £100, let's just say. So then 25% of that is £25. So you owe 2.5% of £25. This is what I mean. Welcome.
But also, as you were saying, so many people are poor in this country. We
Mm-hmm.
And usually send money to India. But there's more because honestly we can each other leave the community.
Correct.
But here, you know, as you say yourself, I've been in Kingston for a long time, I'm born here in Kingston. But the news doesn't come out quite often in this
Yep.
place, especially this is a very wealthy area.
Yep.
I mean, Kingston is one of the biggest borough.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if that news comes quite out in this masjid, we have a problem. So many people will do as you said. You know,
Yep.
as long as it's clear, we take your £100, £90 is going direct to the people, 10% we could, 10% we are taking for the salary or whatever expenses. But I never heard that news, you know.
Yep. No, it's sad because again, also when it comes to news, there are some countries will be very sensitive to. You know, some countries of the world will hear about Yemen, will hear about Syria, will hear about Palestine. Other countries might not even be following what's happening in Muslims in China or Muslims in other places in Africa. So even internationally, we're also selective in our news. And locally, you're right. And locally, correct. Yeah.
I mean, they should say, well, we were trouble in Kingston, for example.
Correct.
Or certain areas.
So I know that if you're right, we don't speak enough, but I know even our mosque, maybe Ali also has the knowledge as well, but even in our mosque, there's people who help the Syrian refugees here in Kingston.
Well, it used to be, but they say now outside, if you go outside the mosque, there's a poor sign, you know, you can't have anything here, you know, in this mosque. Here used to become the Jamaat used to become, they cancel that out.
Because it's hard to administer as well. So I'm trying to, part of my job, like I said, because I want to bring the zakat into the communities more, is trying to help mosques understand how they can offer the support, because they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the staff. If they open the service and everyone keeps knocking every day for money, how do they check and what do they, it's a big, they're not set up for this work. So it's trying to help the mosques find a way how they can offer this support. Our charity, National Zakat Foundation, started in 2011, and the reason why it started was because there were stories of Muslim women sleeping on the streets. They were escaping from a domestic violence setting, and it takes the government quite a few weeks to do something for them. So in the meanwhile, they had nothing. The very first campaign of National Zakat Foundation had the following tagline. It was, "What's the point of 3 million Muslims if Aisha has to sleep on the street?" This was the tagline. And even today we receive, there's a good number of domestic violence stories where the people leave the home, but the government's not going to catch them straight away. You know, our government's very inefficient and very undesirous of help. So it takes a lot of effort to sort out these benefits. And in the meanwhile, people don't have a lot of support. They're just relying on friends. And it's not always that easy. And the last thing in our community as well, we have this understanding that unless the person's bones are showing and they're on the street, they don't deserve zakat. And that's not the correct way. Although Kingston is well-to-do, if we have a neighbor, especially now the prices are all going up, there will be people, even here, they might look like they have a nice home or whatever, there are people even here who are just barely paying rent and just barely paying bills and just barely paying everything. And now that the bills are going up, they will have the anxiety that none of us want for ourselves about, can we even continue living? Or should we take the kids out of school? Or do we have to do more jobs in the evening, or what? This anxiety is something, we don't want it for ourselves, we shouldn't want it for our neighbors. That's why I said it's not always they have to be on the street begging. If a person is struggling, they deserve our help. So that's just something that we have to think about. Allahu A'lam. Barakallahu feekum. Salam. Yeah, so based on the way I presented in my presentation today, all the classical schools of law say zakat has to be to a Muslim. And it's not about charity is only for Muslims. Like I said, charity from the beginning was very much stressed, but zakat is within the logic of these 5 pillars, which is about when you belong to this community, what does it entail? It entails that there's a care in the community. It involves that there are spaces where they are free to worship Allah as equals. It involves that there will be meals they can have when they break the... What does it mean to belong? The first of the pillars I didn't talk about, the Shahada. Why is the Shahada with these pillars? Because the Shahada is the entry point into this community. What the Shahada tells us is whoever says these 2 statements, you can't keep them out. let them in. Whoever says these two statements, you can't doubt them. You can't say, but I'm not sure. You let them in. The Prophet ﷺ stressed this a lot. I think it was Usama ibn Zayd, the son of the beloved of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. He was in a jihad campaign, and they had the enemy cornered, and the person said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah, and he still went and he killed him in the military campaign, and went back to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ said to him, أَقَتَلْتُ بَعْدَ مَا قَالَ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Did you really kill him after he said La ilaha illallah? And then he answered, Ya Rasulullah, إِنَّمَا كَانَ مُتَعَوِّذًا. He was just saying it to save his life. But why in that moment suddenly you want to believe? It doesn't make sense. Like, you've been fighting the Muslims, now you're cornered, all of a sudden Iman has entered your heart. It doesn't make sense. He said obviously he was saying it to protect himself. Why would he now suddenly start believing? But the Rasul didn't accept this from him. He kept saying, قَتَلْتُ بَعْدَ مَا قَالَ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. And then he said it, فَمَا زَالَ يُكَرِّرُهَا عَلَيَّ حَتَّى وَدِدْتُ أَنِّي لَمْ أَكُنْ أَسْلَمْتُ قَبْلَ ذَلِكَ الْيَوْمِ. He said the Rasulullah kept saying that to me again and again, until I started wishing I never became Muslim except today. I didn't have to account for that story. So the Rasul made it so strong that if they say the word, you have to accept them and care for them in this community. If you look at the logic of the 5 pillars together, then this is the essence of da'wah, that make being a Muslim meaningful and dignified and something someone is proud to belong, and whoever wants to join, join. And if they join, they have all the same rights that everybody else has. So it's part of the logic of what it means to create ummah and create community of faith, separate from all the other charities of Islam. That's what zakat is very particular. Even the zakatul fitr, the zakatul Eid, the Hanafi school say you can give it to non-Muslims, very, very interestingly. It's just about, this is our Eid, you're our neighbor, here, have some food, it's fine. But this zakat, the zakatul mal, the zakat which is the rukn of Islam, this is for Muslim to Muslim, for the sake of what I've mentioned. But there's nothing here that says charity is not for non-Muslims. It says zakat is a very particular institution. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you all very much for your patience. You've honored me, and you kept me company. If you want to look for the payment services or just the calculation services or all the questions and answers or the consultation, just National Zakat Foundation online as well. Barakallahu feekum. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.